Dumela, Sawubona, Sakpase, Namaste, Upshin, Dubra Ota, Assalamu alaikum, Hotep. Buenas noches, bonsoir, good evening. Welcome everyone to episode 21 of the Lott Carey Women in Service Everywhere Digital Couch. My name is Doriel Inez Larrier, and I am your host for this evening. Based on the protocol that we know to call, let me give a welcome and a greeting from Reverend Emmett L. Dunn, who is the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Lott Carey Baptist Farm Mission Convention, Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, who is our President, Dr. Jesse Williams, who is our first Vice President, Dr. James Victor, second Vice President, and of the Lott Carey Women in Service everywhere, we have Reverend Dr. Angelita Clifton, Reverend Dr. Brenda McBorough, the first vice president, and Sister Lynette Richardson, who is our second vice president. And now, without further pontification, we are going to welcome to the Digital Couch today Dr. Micah L. Madison McCreary, who is the current president of the New Brunswick Theological Seminary. Hear ye him.
Hello, pleasure. Good to be here. How are you?
We are so very thankful and humble that you have graced our presence here tonight. And we're going to get into our conversation. But first, I think you are the best person to talk about what you do well and why you are here tonight.
Well, first, I give honor to God, the Creator, God, the Redeemer, and God, the Empowerer. I give honor to the ancestors, many who have gone on before, whose sacrifices, whose struggles make this all possible. To my many teachers, mentors, family members, my partner in life, Jacqueline Elise Madison McCreary, to my daughter, to everybody. It's what's up, it's good. So that's kind of there. Why am I here? I don't know. I'm good at what I do. I love what I do. I was a pastor for about 30 years and actually pastored for 17 of those years with my wife. And another 11, we were on staff together with John W. Kinney down in Virginia. I was also a professor of psychology for about 24 years and have been a licensed clinical psychologist. So those three things have really just converged to make me who I am and to really be happy. I'm now president here and love it. It's the fulfillment of the destiny, the dream. So yeah, that's kind of me.
And I think there's another little tidbit that you left out. So the current location that you are at has some history in the country. Do you mind sharing that with us?
New Brunswick Theological Seminary.
Yes.
So the fact that we're one of the oldest seminaries, organized in 1784 in New York, in the Bronx, and then came over to New Jersey when the founder and first president of the seminary became the fourth president of Rutgers, which was then Old Queens. And so we've been around for a minute. I am honored to be the first person of color to be the president, man of color to be the president of this institution. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting to watch the shift in theological studies. A number of sisters and brothers are now becoming heads of both, not just HBCUs or historically Black seminaries, but also historically white seminaries. And that's an interesting piece right there.
And that is definitely something to be commended. And that is what gets you right there.
Amen. Well, it's good to be here. I see this as an honor. My wife wears the Thursday black all the time. And so it was like my time to join her today and join in the Women in Black. And domestic violence is such an important, powerful issue. So I'm glad to be here to talk about that as well.
Excellent, excellent. And so those of you who know what I ask two things. Of course, number one, please share this. This is on a personal Facebook. It is on the Lott Carey Wise Salt Facebook page as well, which is a private group. And it is also on Lott Carey TV on YouTube. And so whether you have people on the book or not, you can actually share this information with other people to get them into the conversation. The other thing I ask is that if you hear something that is noteworthy, something that is post-worthy, something that is like, ooh, an aha, or even a praise or a preaching moment, please type it in the chat. Please comment those things that you find interesting, and we will pull it up during the conversation, and we will engage you in the chat as well.
Okay.
So thank you to my stream team, who I know is going to be in the room. Let's get into these conversations. So tonight's conversation has to do with a trauma sensitive theology.
Hmm.
Trauma sensitive theology. So during the last year, we were speaking about trauma informed work, and this year we sort of shifted to creating safe and
Mm.
sacred spaces
I share.
so that we can do this work, creating safe and sacred spaces. And so we've talked about it from the position of, let's say, from the door,
Mm.
meaning from getting people into the building, getting people back into the building,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are sitting in the pews, and the various mm, parts of the aisle that they may walk in, whether
Mm-hmm.
they have experienced or not, whether they have experienced, but what type of
Mm-hmm.
trauma they have experienced,
Yeah.
as well as how do we let people back in the door when maybe their trauma
Mm-hmm.
has had them walk out, either walk
Mm-hmm.
out or be asked to leave for a variety of reasons. And so now we're asking yourself during this evening, as we close out this year of creating safe, sacred spaces, because you are sitting at you're not the pastor in this particular situation. You were acting as a an administrator
Mm-hmm.
of teaching the people who are going to be leading the work.
Yeah.
So kind of maybe just below Jesus, something,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. You're
Yeah.
discipling the disciples, right? And so we're asking you these questions based on your position.
Mm-hmm.
So you ready to go?
Ready to go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
first question: the intention of trauma-sensitive theology is to help theologians, professors,
Mm-hmm.
clergy, caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
therapists speak well of God and faith without
Mm-hmm.
further wounding survivors of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does trauma sensitive theology help us to do that?
Yeah. Great question. It's interesting because I'd also put not just wounding, but triggering trauma patients. Because what happens is that if you don't understand trauma, if you don't understand clinical work, if you don't understand how the word connects to those, you can really mess someone up. And what happens is a lot of times it's not trauma sensitive theology because the person does not understand trauma. The person does not understand how to do clinical work, and the person does not understand the word of God. And what happens is the intersectionality of those three is what makes a trauma therapist who is theologically trained and prepared really awesome. For example, I'm a victim of domestic violence. My mom was. I watched her, and and I grew up with that. And so, I was very sensitive. I remember once walking down the street in the city in Michigan, and this woman and this man were fighting, and I couldn't just walk by. I jumped in. I wound up getting hit upside the head by pulling him off of her, but I had to do something. And having gone through trauma, having experienced it, having seen it, it's not something you can put on a shelf. I tell people all the time that when you really get into a trauma person, you never forget the trauma. You may find a healthy place for it or an unhealthy place for it, but it's always there. So that's one piece of it. And what happens when you really train to be a clinician, you really train on how to connect with a person in a therapeutic way, using your timing, using the tactics, using dosage to do those kind of things. And so you have that there. And then you recognize the word and where that comes in. For example, I just love Psalms 109, where that psalmist is just going off. When are you going to help me? What's going on, God?
Mm.
To understand lament, to understand what it means to cry out to God. So you put all that together with someone who comes in with that pain. I'm sensitive to where they are. They're sensitive to where I am. You really are able to develop a relationship where you can be like that 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley. It's like you recognize we're going through, because I've gone through, I've made it through, I've made it to the other side, to the mountaintop, to the place with God. And so I know that somebody else can make it through. So I go back into the valley, knowing the experience of going through the valley to lead them out of the valley. And that's what happens in that way.
Let me. You actually just triggered something that I wanted to ask. Are people who are trained to do this work, must they go through their own level of counseling or therapy to identify the space and the place that they sit in so that they can serve? Because in from my understanding, let's say someone who's doing work in rehabilitation of substance abuse,
Mm-hmm.
some of the best people to do that work
Mm-hmm.
are those that have worked through that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So is it true that someone who does, let's say, clinical psychology or therapeutic work or psychiatry, must they go through some form of, maybe let's you sit on the couch first so I can see where
Mm-hmm.
you're coming
Mm-hmm.
from before
Yeah.
I license you to go
Yeah.
out and prayerfully bring harm and bring healing and
Yeah.
not more harm?
Two pieces to that question. One, I think it's always best to work on your stuff, and to figure out what your stuff is when it gets in the way, when it enters into the room, and your stuff can come from so many places. There's so many good things and bad things that have happened in each of our lives that we can use, to do the work. And so, what happens when you really get with another good therapist is that you recognize your own stuff, and when that's an interference, when that's a hindrance, or when that's something that will actually bless the work that you're doing. So that's the first piece. The second is I actually worked in substance abuse therapy for a long time. I don't recommend that or say that everyone has to have gone through those kind of disorders to be helpful to another, but you have to have experience there. So whether it's that you study, you connect. So with if you haven't had trauma, you haven't really gone through a serious trauma where it's now complex trauma, as we call it. Where it's been this persistent, systematic abuse that you've gone through, maybe. Well, still sit with someone who has, and if you're going to do that work, and understand some of the best gifts a therapist has and why they become good is that they walk with other people, and you grow from the traumas and the pains of others. You don't take them on, you don't walk in their shoes, but as you walk with them through the valley, you recognize what they're going through. There is an enhancement, though, if you do have those experiences. But then if you have those experiences and you haven't done the work on yourself, you actually are a hindrance. So it's complicated for me. And I love supervising it to figure out what a person's strengths are. Should you do this? I don't do well. I do better now, but there was a time in my life where I couldn't do therapy with mature African American women. Because I had a mama transference. I loved my mother, and I wasn't going off on my mother. And if I needed to go off in that therapy, it wasn't going to happen. And someone finally said, "Look, you need to do something." So I had to figure out a different way, because I'm still not going to go off on my elder. I'm just not going to do it. But I've got a way to still confront caringly, and to care enough to confront, and confront in a caring manner. And that's what worked it out for me. So there's some tools you can always develop when you do the work to figure out how to do what based upon your idiosyncrasies and weaknesses, strengths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I love it. So I'm actually going to pull up you have some fans already. So
Oh,
we have Brother Wesley Wilson. He says, "Teach, Doc."
What's up, sir?
We also have Mark Arthur St. Cyr. Says, "Thanks God. Excellent." Reverend Douglas Moore. Dr. McCreary is a president with a pastor's heart. It's a blessing to have fans. So folks, please make sure that you share this. And if you hear something that is just very noteworthy and should be captured, a gem that he may say, because he's going to be dropping a lot of them, please type them in the chat and I will definitely bring them up to the stage here. But if you are on Facebook, you have to click that blue link that says you give permission for us to identify your name, or we'll have to say, "Hi, Facebook user." Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So why is it back? Okay, so it's argued that care of traumatic wounding must include all dimensions of the human person, including our spiritual practices, religious rituals, community participation, as well as our theological thinking. Why is it important to appreciate this holistic approach? Before you say that, something that you just said a moment ago, it appears now in the last 15 years or so that yes, we need Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
but we could use Jesus and a therapist.
Mm.
So now, why is it important to appreciate this holistic approach?
It's because the sequential stress that happens that causes trauma needs a really powerful intervention. And for me, talking about Jesus, he shows us that because it's not just the economics, it's not just the class issues, it's not just the political issues that mess with us. He came and said, no, it's not all that. It's about my relationship with my Father. That's where the power comes from. And so I think a lot of us don't recognize that the Jesus piece is about relationship. It's not about the political system. It's about relationship. Therapy is about relationship. Church is about relationship. Spirituality is a relationship. You and I have become sister and brother, because of relationship, because of the energy, the spiritual energy that's here. And if we don't channel that, we don't connect in a way where we can do the heavy lifting, the heavy work that it takes to liberate a person. Someone who is just messed up with pain in their life is not just going to get better because you wish them to get better, because you preach them to get better. You got to get in there. I love it when folk take the word on Sunday and then break it down to study it on Wednesday and then begin to apply it on Thursday. I mean, it's a complicated piece, and nothing that the Lord gives us is just that simple. And what I love about relationship is that being a good therapist who knows the Lord, they've got two ways of relating. So they're
Correct.
not just relating on one level, you're relating on two levels. And that's the piece. It's like it's not either or, it's and both.
It's both that. You're
Yeah,
right.
it's
You're right.
I mean, and it's like if I go, I'm a black belt, I'm a fighter. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. But if I go out, I ain't going out with no whack preparation. I'm gonna get ready, and when we enter into
Right.
the arena, because I don't know what you bringing. And too many folk, whether it's in church or in the therapy room, you don't know the pain the person's bringing. And if you're not prepared to that level with all my tools, I want every possible tool I have available because I don't know how I'm going to need it.
So, yes. And so, on that note,
Yes.
let us just put on the table
Yes.
that there are preachers.
Yes.
Wait, okay. There are preachers.
There are preachers.
There are teachers.
There are teachers.
There are therapists.
There are therapists.
There are counselors.
There are counselors.
There are psychiatrists.
There are psychiatrists.
There are psychologists.
There are psychologists. Social workers.
Right. There are social workers. Sometimes the preacher can possibly also be a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist, but it's not always the case.
It's not. It's not.
And sometimes people try to blend all of them together.
Yeah.
But if you're not trained that way,
you can mess somebody up.
If you just went to seminary,
yeah,
and you didn't go to school for social work,
yeah,
you may be able to send them to the yellow pages that we used to have back in the day. But can you actually sit there and do like a whole therapeutic session? Please don't jack somebody else.
There's some awesome, phenomenal expository preachers who develop that into some counseling stuff. And they wound up getting sued because you can't just take that and use that way, and that's nothing against the expository, powerful way of preaching, and those of us who are therapist preachers actually preach in a way that is very therapeutic. So that part is there. But even after that Sunday morning hallelujah, you got to understand, is this biological? Is this, environmental? Where is this familial? Where are the stressors coming from? Is it, I cannot drink, not because I got this religious piece against drinking. I've got a gene that just messes me up anytime alcohol gets the system. And so, I had to find that out and figure it out. Don't know, they pledging me and they wonder why this boy acting so crazy. It's not, it's because of the gene. And so if we don't get all that, we can hurt somebody who's already hurt.
Right. So some people don't recognize that some of their constituents have one foot on the banana peel, but the other one is about to step on the end.
Yeah.
Of what you say or what you suggest or what you may place that person into a situation may make it a little bit slicker than what they already are exposed.
And that person who's already vulnerable needs protection, not abuse.
Right. So I'm going to thank you, Robin Joseph. She said, say it again. Thank you, Dolores Brady. Amen. Okay, Facebook users, I'm going to put you up there. The village. Yes. Right. The village. Thank you so much. All right. So this model of this holistic approach, how is it different? How is it different from what we currently do? So we kind of like touched on that, right? We said sometimes someone can like just do the preaching, but they may try to strap on or add on a little bit. But the reality is that we need, as the last person just said, I'm going to sort of take it out of context. Maybe we need a village approach.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just you're going to church. And so also let me throw in there, it is part of the conversation that, again, like over the last 15, 20 years, and I don't know what it was, or let's say 20, 25 years, that we have morphed outside of the church walls to include, other, what we now title mental health professionals into the work of healing. I don't know what, maybe you know better. I don't know what where that shift came from. It's a blessing of a shift that we're not shamed because we want to chat with someone, right? It wasn't too long ago that it was just pray about it. You're not praying enough. You gotta fast more. You gotta get on that morning's bench. Be late prostrate. What happened that we started incorporating mental health professionals into the spiritual work? When did that happen?
I think it happened around 1968 with the organization of the Society of Black Psychologists. They really began to look at culture and recognizing that church is another form of culture, and began to say, as we look at, the African ways that we do things and the unity and the family piece, that bring that in and recognize that the church is a piece there. I think it wasn't Black psychologists that really saw this total dichotomy between the church and psychology. That's Freud. That's some other folk. Okay, we just don't see it that way. It's always been the shaman, the storyteller, the person who was doing the healing, the guru. All those folk were together in our culture, and so I think waking us up to doing it the way that we do it is really there. And even when you understand what it takes to do psychology, the first thing I want to do is I want to understand the person. I mean, okay, that don't go against church. Second thing, I want to use techniques. Well, I'm not cussing and fussing and fighting with you. I'm just looking at what are some ways to do family systems work for me? What are some ways to do Rogerian ways? Using those techniques that way. You look at, you need a strong relationship. What does that? You need effective models. I mean, so it's not antithetical to our spirituality. That's the piece that's there. It's not going to unsave you, and if it will unsave you, then maybe you weren't saved in the first place. But that's a whole other story.
Right. So this just sparked something in my mind. And please, thank you so much, people who are dropping in comments. And even if you want to ask a question, I'm going to ask a question. I've done this a couple of times. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm just asking for it to be like a little a pin that's dropped on a bathroom floor where you can hear the reverberation. Just marinate on this.
Okay.
So you mentioned Rogerian, let's say, theology. Maybe you want to drop in some Freudian or like Hornai, or I am in the education field, so my field is like people under the age of 18. So I'll talk about Bronfenbrenner and bioecological theory. I'll talk about Vygotsky. I'll talk about Piaget, etc. Right?
Yes.
Anybody that we study?
They got it from us.
No. Right. Who's from the continent? I'm just asking. So when you brought up like the Association of Black Psychologists, or even like the Association of Black Sociologists, right? Talk about who are my favorite people, like Nathan and Julia Hare, Malefi Keti Asante. Come on, let's see who else.
Kwanzaa
The
Kunjufu,
right, come on,
Nakeem Akbar, you know.
Dr. Amos Wilson. Come on,
Yes,
people. I need
yes,
you to drop this thing as
yes,
well. But if you talk about those people, those brilliant minds, those gems, our griots,
yes,
and how they had to infuse the African diasporic ideologies and philosophies of I am not like Ubuntu, right? I'm not I,
no,
I'm we. I am because we are. Then
because we are.
there is an opportunity to look outside of the Western, theorists and say, you're not looking at that individual. You're looking at how, and this is a Bronfenbrenner, like microsystem, mesosystem, macrosystem, chronosystem, etc., and how all of the systems of the community converge and influence the child and the family, and then how it then sparks back out. But it's always interesting to me, and I'm still waiting for the the African theorists or the diasporic theorists to be incorporated into these conversations.
Pendergrass worked around, that whole model of the ecosystem with her work. Into the Progressive Life System out of DC did a lot of work around it back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there was so much of that being done. My impact program, as Pause, Pray, Analyze, Children, Take Action, was based upon the principles of the Nguzo Saba. I mean, so much of that is there, and it's in us, and it heals. And so to use it, in the community work, and then to just apply it to the clinical work, just made sense to so many of us. And it helps when the trauma becomes complex, which is where there's this pervasive thing going on around the trauma. You have to have some internal pieces to help you with that. I mean, you can't just mentally do it. It's not a mind thing, it's a heart thing. And until you help a person connect those two, they messed up,
Excellent.
And I can't allow anyone to be, I'm gonna use everything in my power to help them get unmessed up. Wembley, yes. Wembley talked about the fact that, Wembley, I love his piece. We talks about that. Edward Wembley, he's a professor down in ITC doing some work down there. But he said years ago that, you get the stages of coping and sustaining. That's what church can do. But there's an era of healing and reconciling. To really get to that age, you need a therapist to help you do that. And so it's one of those theories that really moves you there as well, so yeah.
That's powerful. Even just so, wait, say that again. So coping and sustaining, that's what the church can help with. But in order to
heal and reconcile to the stuff, you really need a little bit more, has been my argument. When I look at Wembley's model, that was there.
So the question that I just asked about how are we currently doing that? What types of, I'll say programming do we have in the church currently that actually keeps people, or let's say before the past 20, 30 years, has kept people within the church walls to do that work? So the first thing that comes into my mind is, we have a men's group.
Yeah.
Or we have a women's ministry.
Yeah.
Or we have a young adult ministry. But if the leaders of those ministries are not clinically trained, they kind of could, I'm not saying they are, but they kind of could be keeping people stuck in the mud.
Yeah. But if you become, I love that. Support groups are helpful though, because you can share. And even as that conversation dialogue goes, we're rolling in the mud. As I become comfortable in the mud and I recognize my mud can actually protect me from rays and sunshine, things that would burn me up. So mud has a powerful piece to play in it. So for me, it's like, that's there. I had a men's group at the church before we left to come here, and I got a call. They're still doing it, and it's powerful where brothers can just get together, sisters can just get together, young people can just get together and just being, is we're human beings. We're not human doers. And so the being part is healing in and of itself. So that's a cool piece there. Yeah.
Excellent. I just needed to sort of flow with that question. I said, Some people have, ministry groups. Again, I will say, if there isn't some form of a shifting in the conversation or in the work,
Yeah.
then you could be doing all the sharing.
Yeah.
Are you growing? Is there a goal?
Right.
Is there a stage? Is there a process of um, at some point coming out of that muck and shifting into a better version?
Yeah. You
Yeah.
need, I mean, you look for catharsis. The best predictor of future behavior, is past behavior, unless there's a cathartic event.
Yes.
So what someone's always done, they're going to keep doing until there's something that breaks that mold. I used to not want to be like my dad, and I was doing everything to not be like him, even though I look like him. And so every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the person I didn't want to be, and
Mm.
it was disconcerting, if not some other things. But when I reconnected with him in college and got to know him and got to understand where his pain came from and his trauma, I was then able to say, okay, I don't want to do some of those things, but it's got nothing to do with who he is as a being. And I can, in that part which is already internalized in me, I can now value, and therefore take it and go with it. That kind of catharsis has to happen for somebody when they've got that kind of pain and struggle and dirt in their system, so yeah.
So, do you actually want to elaborate on the role that your father has had and the influence that he's had on at this moment?
Oh, there's so much there. I
Oh,
mean,
uh-oh, you stepping back. The body language says, "Nah, we ain't ready." That'll
no,
make
no,
me think
it's one of those pieces that's so complex because you know he made me who I am in the sense that I didn't, he was my first pastor. It was under my father's preaching that I actually received Christ, had a vision that Christ came down and touched me. And then because of the riots in Detroit and his pain, I wasn't conscious of what it does. It just destroyed him.
Mm.
And I'm being the oldest of 7 children. I had to, be there with mom. That though blessed me to get to understand the strength of one mother and of women in a way which I'm eternally grateful. It also caused my brother, to rebel in ways. It caused me, because I call it, when you got a soul injury or a father wound, one way to actually come out of that is to become a person who actually overperforms, who has a performance-based heart. Okay. And
Like
so
someone
I
who overcompensates.
overcompensates. And that was me. My brother became angry and became gangster, same pain, but 2 different people, just 17 months apart, who chose to 2 different things, And so to watch that and to see what happened to my brother, I was even more angry. To not be covered with finances and the poverty, the struggle that went on. So all that's there. To reconcile with him, and to find out, my father, we had a real powerful conversation in 1985 Christmas, and then he died 1986 February 14th. So I was glad to have reconciled. The deep part for me is I literally was in seminary at that time, finishing up and going to be a pastor. Hadn't really decided to become a psychologist. Well, I finally finished my PhD. I'm literally moving from Philadelphia, the Children's Hospital there, working back to Virginia to become a professor. I find a letter my father wrote me in '86 that I either could not open or did not open. I read the letter then in '93 as I'm going to be a professor. My father says, I've been struggling. I'm going through therapy now. I know what I want to be in life. I want to be a clinical psychologist. And I'm sitting for the exam to become a clinical psychologist.
So your
So
father shared that he wanted to be a clinical psychologist?
in the letter, yeah. And I never read it, never knew it. It wasn't a part of my story. And now here I am becoming what he wanted to be, at the time of his death. So, so my dad stuff, that wasn't me running from it. It's just that's a piece of me that's a heavy, yeah.
It all works out for the good. That's the first thing that just popped into my head.
Yeah.
So whether by
It's that Sankofa. It's that, yeah.
so it almost feels like we talk about like the sins of omission and the sins of commission, like the things that you do intentionally, but the things that you kind of don't do with intention, but it just happens. So do you think now looking back that some of the positive and the not so positive at the time of it was the things that were being done, those influences on your life, he either instructed or obstructed, and it drove you to this place of finding like healing and restoration for someone else because possibly you were trying to do it for yourself, and therefore what is that, transference? Am I getting that word right?
Yeah.
I didn't go to school for it, but I was paying attention.
Well, and let's go biblical. All things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. I mean, one thing that did not vary and change was my commitment to being led by my call to God and being led by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so, and one of my favorite concepts now in psychology is what I call the Holy Saturday, or the Holy Pause. And that's where, there's this Holy Friday where you're crucified, and the Holy Sunday where you're resurrected. There's a day in the middle. And Ephesians tells us that on that day in the middle, Jesus led captivity captive. He wasn't just slumbering in his death. He was doing some work. So for me, those periods of brokenness, those periods of being taken down from the cross and being laid in the grave is a time to do the kind of work. And Frankl calls it the whole issue of the stimulus and the response. And after every stimulus, there's going to be a response, but there's a pause in between there. And it's that pausing where we can find out, okay, this is what God's been doing, and do that work.
Excellent. And thank you for the people who are sharing. I'm trying to put it up as well. Thank you, Brother Wilson. Yes, it is a touching story, and thanks for sharing. All right,
it's in my book.
Say it again.
It's in my book, but anyway.
That's part 2. Don't give it away yet. All right, let's go to our. So let's talk about how you do this work from a seminary, let's call it a seminarian perspective or an academician perspective. So trauma-informed congregational leaders can help the wounded move toward resiliency by offering another way of thinking theologically in response to traumatizing abuses of relational power and our resources for restoration. So how are we using our power as those who are in spiritual leadership positions? So why is this strength-based approach effective?
Strength-based approach is, I call it post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress, and not post-traumatic stress disorder. So PTSD is by name a disorder. But when you really focus on a strength perspective, you're saying, no, it's post-traumatic, yes, but it's post-traumatic growth. How can I grow? Like I was just sharing about my dad. How can I grow from what I went through, from what I've been through? I was talking to a young brother back in the 80s, and we were both talking about sometimes it's just the Negroes who actually come from the hood who are able to do some good, because we already know what it's like. We know what brokenness is. And so if I've been broken already, I understand how to use that. And that's the healing that happens from a strength perspective. When you've gone through trauma and you've made it through that valley, you're not up on the hill. You can do like I do. I go back in. That place of the unknown, where you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to turn out. Well, I can go back there now because I know in my unknown, somebody walked with me. Whether it's spirit, whether it's person, whether it's sister, whether it's friend, somebody walked with me and helped me get out. So now I can go back and do that as well. So that's what growth strength does. And that's a piece that helps with the grieving, helps people get over that. Yes, you're going to.
So it's very interesting that when you were just talking about, so in essence, the people who know best of the community to do the community work are those who have been raised, reared, and sometimes redirected through the community. That's another thing that'll preach. But so why I'm thinking about training day.
Yeah.
Help me, people. I think about towards the end of the movie of Training Day. Denzel Washington's character, he goes back right into the hood. He's even though he's law enforcement, he's sort of right. Am I on the right track? He's like on the other side. He's playing the other side of the side of the law, not doing the right thing. He goes back into the community that in essence he's trying to, or he says he's trying to protect, but the people he's trying to really kind of do dirty with, and they kind of stand there and like, nah, son, you're not gonna do us like that.
Yeah.
Right. You're not gonna take the role that you're supposed to have, even though you're really playing both sides, and kind of continue to do the dirty work. It's not the people who are, let's say, always doing the right thing, but at that moment, they kind of sees, even though they may be on the wrong side of the law, they had some moral fortitude. They had some moral characters like, we may be doing dirty stuff, but you doing the dirtiest of the dirty, we're not letting you have that. Powerful. The other thing is that you were talking about how, again, how the people who, let's just say, other people would say they are part of the problem. Why would I have somebody who's part of the problem try to be part of the solution? Because you can't have people who haven't literally and figuratively walked the walk come into a community to try to heal a community, right? Which is why our neighborhood teams or neighborhood policing is done by the people who live on the block. We can work in concert with law enforcement, but you got to let the people who live in the apartments or live in the different sections or the different wards speak to the people who are on the block, who are hanging out the windows, who are between the buildings or in alleys or whatever, because they know how to use the language. They know how to use the language. So
it makes me think of Moses and how, unbeknownst to himself, he wanted to help, but he wound up murdering somebody, because he didn't know how to do it, had to then flee and go to the wilderness and spend time with a family to help him heal and help him realize how he should do this. And then argues with God, that I'm not capable, which is the humility is there. But it's amazing to look at all this stuff and the process of growing into a leader to help anybody. We can go, it's just complex, and it's something that has to happen though. To be a great leader, you got to go through something. The crucible is important. That's the bottom line.
Got it. So let me see all right, no more comments at this moment. So we're going to move to the next question. Thank you so much for the people who are really commenting. It looks like people are sharing. I'm just trying to check the multiple pages that we're on just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, here's our last question. So could you identify a passage of scripture to illustrate what this strength-based approach looks like?
For me, again, there's so many, but my favorite still is that Ephesians 4 is that, when Jesus led captivities captive, he gave gifts to the church. And that's where this is. We don't recognize that a lot of people who are therapeutically oriented aren't necessarily trained therapists, but to have someone who has that prophetic gift is where I place that. To really do the work of a therapist, in a sense, it is the work of the prophet. And it's to see into somebody's pain, see into somebody's trauma, see into somebody's hurt, intimacy, into me you see, to see into that, is just a cool piece. That's where the prophet comes in. And so that's what's there for me. And it's again that space between our trauma and our deliverance, is where that work's done. And that's that room, that's that sheltering hand where you hold somebody up together. So that's my favorite piece there as well.
Okay, so I put it in the chat. So for those people who need to go do a little refresher, or maybe you need to print it out, put it on your refrigerator, print it out, put it on your front door, print it out, put it on your mirror so you can take a look, so you can remember, not just for other people, but for yourself, where our strength comes from.
Mm.
Okay. Last question. So, what are some important things we should know about developing a trauma sensitive theology as we're coming to as we're
Yeah,
coming to
yeah,
this
yeah.
conversation?
I think that context matters. And even in understanding the word, everybody wants to be literal, and I'm not going to get into a whole Old Testament, New Testament thing about what's the literal. That's cool, but the word was actually said in context and given in context, and it healed in context. And so, when we ignore context, we ignore significant things that can inform us and help us do the work. When we ignore where someone is with that's there as well. So I think when you think theologically, you're thinking narrative, you're thinking story. And the story is not yet over. You're thinking story. And when you're thinking story, you get to hear. I mean, one of the things you did for me we came on, and just got to hear each other and understand story. That's just powerful there. I use the final piece for me. I use the model called where it's releasing, lamenting, reflecting, waiting, and acting. So that's releasing, lamenting.
I'm gonna type it in the comments. Go ahead.
Okay. Releasing, lamenting, reflecting, waiting, and acting. Okay. And that's to me, because the first part of it, that releasing is a process of being humble. The humility that we need to want to admit I need help, to want to admit, I can't do this. I'm not just an individual soldier. I'm from a community. Lamenting is actually enduring the suffering and calling out to God and understanding that in there. And then, to reflect is to find the upside of what you've gone through. And then, for me, the waiting is where you really get into the relaxing. You systematically desensitize yourself to the pain. I had to become a warrior because I had to get to a place where fighting was natural. That was my waiting, and it was natural. And then the last is the problem solving piece where, now it's time to act. It's time to do some things with what you've learned and what you develop. More folk, become so comfortable and so kindred with their trauma and their pain that they can't leave it and let it go.
So how do you resign yourself to going into martial arts when we are supposed to be peacemakers? I'm being sarcastic. When
Yeah.
we're supposed to be, holy, we were just supposed to pray it away. How do you go to like either getting on the mat or putting up
Yeah.
dukes or how'd you do that?
Because of the social programs my church was doing, we found out from the FBI that we had been put on the burn list. We were going to be attacked. I had a concealed weapon permit, because they came there. I'm the only male there, and they came to burn the church down. It had to be dealt with, and that's just
Wait. Why were they planning on burning y'all down?
because of
This
the
is tea.
because we was changing people's lives or helping them change their lives. We were doing social things. We had a school program I called the BEST program, Brothers Energized, Spirited, and Talented. We brought in third graders from the school who were failing to the church, and I taught them martial arts. They had people in the church talking to them, helping them grow. They were working on robotics and learning, modeling, etc., like that. And in the Karamu, when they were, showing their parents their products, they were proud. They went from being the worst identified to the best in classes. I mean, we were just doing stuff. And, the Sankofa Institute was just doing stuff, and they just were not feeling us. And so they wanted to take us out. And so,
So you were actually utilizing for those who may not know, an African theology or a paradigm. Let's use a paradigm / framework
yeah,
of the Nguzu Saba,
yes,
which is from who? Dr. Maulana Karenga, who
great.
instituted Kwanzaa. Those of you who say we need not participate or celebrate or recognize Kwanzaa, it's not It's not about the seven candles. It's not about the language. It's about the paradigm. It's about looking at the community. It's about looking past, not past as if we're not looking at it, but looking prior to not just our time 1619 moving forward when you know
Yeah,
that.
and you can find scriptures to undergird each one of the principles. So whether it's self-collective self-responsibility, cooperative economics, I mean, all those are in the word. And so we just put those and connected the two, like, hey, and move on, but
I love it. I love so in essence, realistically, you were on the watch list and you had to
yeah.
make sure that you hold on a second. Thank you. Sorry. Listen, that's another conversation. We can talk about that too. We can talk about that too. But let me put this last comment up from Reverend Douglas Moore. This is a good one. This will probably be the last question. How can the Academy help pastors to develop preaching language that embraces a trauma sensitivity, because so many of our preaching idioms are quite harmful. You know what, Reverend Moore, I'm going to ask you to say more about that. Can you possibly give, while Dr. Micah McCreary is giving a little extrapolation on that, what preaching idioms do you hear? And actually, the cacophony of people who are here, we can probably like roll in the comments some preaching idioms, because y'all know it's at the tip of your tongue. So just drop in the comments and I'll bring them up. But Pastor McCreary, please say more about that.
I think back to Henry Mitchell, using narrative in preaching. We've gotten away from it of actually, telling the story. To me, that really embraces what goes on. It's like, to look at it that way. I think, again, I mentioned lament is another piece of it. I think really looking at it from a perspective of the situation, complication, resolution is helpful. But there's a model that you can actually look at where it talks about what are the root pains that a person goes through, what are the things that have gone on in their life that you want to address in your sermon. So when you actually identify those, I used to take a line down the middle of a sheet of paper and put down here, what's the root cause? How does it manifest itself? Both in the text and into the person. And so really understanding that, and it's the CRUM model, CRUMB model of preaching. It really is one that will help someone to figure out how to get to the trauma part of it when they're actually preaching, to do it as well. How does the gospel then speak to that root behavior? How does it bring about new behavior and transform them that way? Will be one of my thoughts on that one.
So this is a master class. So what is the CRUM model of preaching? I put down the acronym, but I don't know what
Well, CRUM is the name of the author. And so it's an old book. I don't know if it's in published anymore.
C or K?
C.
Okay, I'll put it up. Great. All right. So then we do have a couple of comments. So this is, here we go. So Reverend Douglas Moore, thank you. I could have been in the loony bin. All right. Right. So yes, right. That's right. I could have lost my mind, but this happened and that. Okay. All right. All right.
And you talked about being child focused, but children help us with that, using the wrong kind of thing. Because was it the cross-eyed bear, and a child will hear that as the cross-eyed bear, not the cross you're bearing. And so when you really began to think about what are the words that I'm saying and how they are actually producing negative things rather than positive things, so that's there. And so many do that. We get caught up into that moment. I tell people all the time, go out to the tree and practice your celebration and make sure that there is nothing there in there as well that does it. CPE, yeah.
What is CPE for those
clinical
of us
pastoral education?
Okay.
And so that's where you actually study to be a chaplain in a sense. But part of the CPE process is really going into what you bring to the table. And so, to really understand, like when I did my CPE, one of the things they said was I leaned too heavily on my prayer. I rejected that advice, but that was their thing, was that, you use it. So what I did was like, okay, how can I use prayer to be therapeutic if I'm going to use the prayer? And so, but they really just go in that way. In that case, it's great training for anyone who wants to develop into a clinician.
Thank you, Sister Jeanette Goodson. Thank you so much. Because I've been going to seminary.
Dr. Goodson.
Yes, she's a fabulous person. Thank you so much. Yes, it's a great tool. Thank you so much. So, folks, this is we're kind of like wrapping up. This is This has been an amazing, it feels like a masterclass. Like, it
Mm.
really is.
All
So
glory and honor.
th- thank you so much. Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Reverend Dr. Micah L. Madison McCreary. And if y'all want to know why I said Madison McCreary, you're going to have to call him for that. You're gonna have to call him for that. But we doing that thing tonight. Thank you so much for the people who have been watching. It is a pleasure again and an honor to chat with you, to have this conversation. Of course, this is the beginning of our new friendship. For those of you who don't know, before we even come live, I always do a little chat session before, just to sort of break the ice, to sort of, feel the energy of the person, so that when we come on to the show, we actually have a very smooth and engaging conversation. I usually book it for 15 minutes. Just
Hmm.
make sure lighting and sound is good. How long were we on?
About 50.
It was about 50 minutes. And it seemed like we were just chatting for 10, which means
Yeah.
it was very synergistic and very amazing. So I look forward to, of course, seeing you again and seeing your work. And I know you have some good work coming out. Again, as a university president, you have to do your own research, you have to do your own publishing. And I know there is a good work coming out of you doing this work as a brother, as a black male, as a black academician, as a black clergy and ministry leader. Thank you so much, Sister Robin. That was outstanding. Welcome, knowledge. Thank you. And this work is not over. It literally has just begun. The relationship, of course, that you have been developing through Reverend Dr. Angelina Clifton. I'm so glad that she brought you to our conversation tonight. Is a relationship that is just being nurtured and developed and culled and crafted into more partnerships and connections
Gotcha.
for both institutions in beautiful ways that will come to fruition in a few, I guess, months or what have you. So we thank you all once again. Thank you so much. If you want to continue to draw questions and or comments, you can do so. And Dr. McCreary or Lott Carey will be able to respond. Oh my goodness, so many people like now commenting. Wait a minute. T-Bass 5, I tell you about. Okay, this has been an amazing exposure, teaching and meeting of the great minds of Lott Carey, and appreciate all the leaders. It's been a blessing. So yes, last comment is that this is the end of this season. This is the end of this topic of creating safe and sacred spaces. I'm very blessed again and honored that Reverend Dr. Angelina Clifton has come up with this theme. And so we will be shifting into a new theme come the next session. So please stay connected. If you watch us on Lott Carey TV, please continue to do that. It's much easier to take that link again, depending on what social media platforms people are participating in. You can share that with anybody in your churches and spaces and thought rooms and think tanks to move the conversation forward. If you are on Lott Carey Y Salt, that is a private Facebook group, so you can always invite people in, and that will be fabulous as well to grow our ministry and our leadership. We are a part of the Lott Carey Baptist Foreign Mission Convention, and so all of the work and the effort and the people's lives that we are changing and influencing and impacting here on the ground, across the sea, across the waters, on different lands, on different continents, is amazing work that has definitely been God ordained and people organized and spirit orchestrated. Yes, I did just make that up, but here we go. So continue to watch us, continue to help us grow, and we will be ever so grateful. Thank you so much. All these people making these comments. I love it. So on that note, peace and blessings. This is from the Lott Carey Baptist Farm Mission Convention, the Lott Carey Women in Service Everywhere, serving and learning together. My name is Doriel Anez Larry. I am the host. I will see you all next month, the first Thursday of every month. And Reverend Dr. Micah L. Madison McCreary, we are so blessed to have had you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.